but we're going to walk our way. Son of a... Hey, welcome to Boysen Reservoir and the mouth of the Wind River Canyon here in central Wyoming. I'm south of Thermopolis. I'm north of Shoshone. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. I'm going to be looking at a really treacherous, dangerous canyon with plenty of falling rocks that periodically come down and take out chunks of the highway and cars. It's so bad they've even posted a sign on the highway just outside of the little town of Shoshone to let you know that you might get socked by a falling rock. So we're going to use abundant caution in here as much as you can against gravity and big rocks. But I'm going to be looking at some Cambrian all the way through Ordovician, Silurian, and even Triassic rocks at the very mouth of the canyon. You might notice behind me there are different attitudes of the rock. And I don't mean some are happy, some are sad. I mean genuine dipping differences. Some are kind of dipping that direction toward the basin, whereas on the horizon they seem to be dipping away. That's because there's a big thrust fault running east-west here. I'm looking north, and we're right on the toe of that thrust. We're standing on it. But what's interesting about this thrust is it doesn't just break clean through. It actually comes up, and then the rocks are sort of bending over the nose of it. So if you look at it in cross-section, you'll see that all the stratigraphy is bent down into the basin. It's creating an anticline here on the nose of the thrust. So the Owl Creek thrust is what's running back behind me. There's another fault up in the canyon we'll see called the Boysen Fault. And there's a whole bunch of smaller accessory faults. If you're a structural geologist, you could really have a good time in here. It's really messed up stratigraphy right here at the mouth of the canyon. All right, let's get going and look at some rocks. All right, our first stop is not very far into the canyon. In fact, we're right at the dam. And Boysen Dam is primarily a power producer. So there's a lot of electricity that's produced out of this dam, as well as, of course, water for irrigation. Recreation is a distant third. It's primarily a power source. And a lot of people are surprised to know this is not the original Boysen Dam. The original Boysen Dam was constructed in 1908. Not surprisingly, he was named for a guy named Boysen, Asmus Boysen, and he built it for power. Same year, the Union Pacific Railway sued him. The UP wanted to be in charge of all power and all things related to that. Well, Asmus Boysen didn't take it lightly. He went to court and he was back and forth with suits with UPR. Unfortunately, in 1915, the Wyoming Supreme Court ruled that UP had the right here, and Asmus Boysen had to take down all the superstructure of his dam. And things got even worse because as the dam sat idle, the generators themselves got totally silted up by 1923. Generators aren't working, dam's not working, there's no hope for it, so it sat abandoned. It was finally decommissioned and taken down in 1948 after a series of additional lawsuits to remove it. So, 40 years it lasted. It only worked for a few of those years, but it showed that you could generate power here from the Wind River if you constructed an appropriate dam. And in 1953, the present-day dam was constructed here, right where the crest of the anticline passes through. So you can see beds to the north are dipping to the north. Across the crest of the dam, everything starts dipping to the south. So that's the saga of the Boysen Dam. named for awesomeness, and the lake has his name as well. I don't know, I guess he had the final laugh because all this stuff is named after him now, the dam and the reservoir. So what we're going to do is continue on through the canyon and start looking at geology. After all, that's why we're here. The dam is just up there past the bend in the curve, and there were some beautiful exposures of Cambrian Grovant formation, but I didn't feel like stopping and getting plastered by a semi. So I opted for the next best thing, which is this first pullout on the Wind River. You know, by the way, this also becomes the Bighorn River at the mouth of the canyon. It's called the Wetting of the Waters, and the wind becomes the Bighorn. Sort of a split personality river. But this is a nice exposure to show us everything from the dark Precambrian rocks on the horizon there, and those are actually amphibolites. They have a lot of heavy metals that make them mafics. There's things like iron in there. So it's a Precambrian plutonic rock, and on top of that is a Cambrian succession. So there's Flathead sandstone. Down at the very base there, that's the Grovant Shale, that kind of rusty, greenish gray and rust-colored Cambrian deposit. Sitting on top of the Grovant is the Gallatin Formation. And the Gallatin has a sandwich of shale, limestone, and then shale. So it's recessive, but has some ridges in there, and the ridges of the limestone, you can also see a little bit of offset because there's a fault that goes through here. And that's actually the Boysen Fault, one of the splays off of it, because the main fault is just behind there. The Big Capper is a combination of the Bighorn Dolomite and the Madison Limestone. So that's Mississippian at the very top. The Bighorn Dolomite is Ordovician. So we've got a full succession of Cambrian through Mississippian at the top of this outcrop. And there's the campground, which, by the way, Asmus Boysen used to live. His little house is in there, his cabin. So that's where Asmus lived, and now it's a campground. You can come in and stay and marvel at the geology here. So now that we've got the stratigraphy of this section figured out, I'm going to go driving up through the canyon. We're actually going to go up section, and I'm going to stop at outcrops of each of these units, in addition to the ones that are on top that we just don't see from here. Here I am in the campground, which back in the day was the area of Asmus Boysen's reservoir. And the original dam he built was somewhere right in here on the river. There's a historical marker sign somewhere in here. But essentially, this is where he built his dam in 1908. And you can see there's a big fault that runs through here, the Boysen Fault, named for old Asmus again. There's our Precambrian amphibolite, which we're going to drive through in a second. I'm going to take you guys on a virtual driving field trip through the tunnel before we stop and take a look at the rocks. And then on the other side, here's those sedimentary rocks, the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian into Mississippian sedimentary rocks. So you can see the fault trace running right through here, right through there, separating Precambrian on the one side from the Paleozoics on the other. And up on the skyline, there's the Madison Limestone again. Also, for anyone who's so inclined, I should mention, if you have a Wyoming state fishing license, you can fish down here. There's some really nice big trout. However, as soon as we leave this campground, you're going to see a sign that announces we're entering the Wind River Indian Reservation. From that point on through the rest of the canyon, you need a tribal permit to fish. So make sure you get one of those if you're going to fish in the river. Welcome to the Precambrian, the oldest rocks in North America. You know, I looked at some other Precambrian rocks down around Virginia Dale and the Wyoming-Colorado border. I said I wasn't going to look at any more, but I lied because here they are again. And just like those, these are some mafics. These are some amphibolites. These are different though. These did not form in a dike swarm. These are not ring dike caldera collapse features. These are actually extruded pillow lavas. There's textures in them that show they were extruded on a seafloor, and they have that kind of pillowy surface to them. Now, there's a lot of traffic. I'm not going to run across and, take a look at them. Others have done that. There's photographs and publications and guidebooks. I'll trust them. The other thing you see here is a big bunch of felsic dikes and incredibly loud semis using their Jake brakes. Way to go, guys. But these felsic intrusions resemble the pegmatites we saw down around the state line of Colorado and Wyoming, around Virginia Dale. So just like there, you've still had secondary fracturing and influx of felsic minerals. In this case, quartzes, orthoclase, feldspars, just like back there. Interestingly enough, you can see where the railway goes through right here. They've had the tunnel through. Really precarious. And if you're driving through the canyon, take a look at that wall, because it really blows your mind, the engineering that went into that. All the tunneling they had to go through, all the stabilization to allow trains to pass on the railway. Mind-blowing stuff. So I'm going to continue going downstream on the Wind River, which becomes the Bighorn. We're going to continue going up section. Where else in the world can you cover 3 billion years in 17 miles of really scenic driving? Not many places, I'd imagine. So we're going to keep going up the Wind River Canyon, say farewell to the Precambrian again. Like I say, I thought I was done with it back around the state line, but apparently not. So we're going to say farewell to the amphibolites and the pillow lavas and get back into the world of sedimentary geology. That's where we're almost happy, right? Well, most of us are happy here. I'm happy here. And it's my channel, so that's all I care about. So this is our first sedimentary succession on top of the Precambrian granite, and it's a really beautiful fluvial system grading upward into tidal flats or distal Sabka or something like that, and eventually a transgression happens. All right. The lighting is not great, and it's covered in chicken wire to prevent it from falling down, but that is the Cambrian Grovant Shale. It's called the Shale, even though there's a little bit of sand and silt in it. It's not really a pure shale, but hey, that's a name it's got stuck with. How do I know it's the Grovant? Well, the color, the texture, and most importantly, and my favorite part about Wind River Canyon, is it's nicely labeled for us. So even if you're not certain, the highway department has made sure that we know what we're looking at. So that is the Grovant Shale. I would run across and take a look at the faces in detail, but as you can hear and see, there's a lot of traffic. So I'll see if I can find a better, more accessible outcrop, because this one's a little bit sketchy. We'll see what we can do. Well, we're in luck. The crumbling nature of that outcrop means there's a whole bunch of chunks of that Grovant over here on this side of the highway. And you can see there's lamination in it. You can see also that it's got a lot of sparkly bits because it's been partly metamorphosed, so you're probably seeing micas and things in there. It's not actually a shale. It's a very fine sand with some silt. For sure there's mud. It looks like there's a fair amount of bioturbation. It looks like burrows in here. I know chunks of Grovant typically have things like planolites and simple horizontal burrows. So it's definitely chewed up. Not terribly exciting from a sedimentary structure point of view, but it gives you an idea of what that stuff looks like. Over there, that is the same material. Welcome to the Cambrian Ordovician boundary. Like all good boundaries, unfortunately it's covered under a lot of talus here, but we're in luck because across the highway it's actually exposed. And if there's enough of a break in traffic like there is now, I'm going to run across and try to put my finger on it. But what we're looking at here is the Gallatin Formation, is the Cambrian slope-forming deposit that's under all the talus on that side of the river. And the really prominent cliff-forming deposit with the manganese oxide is the Ordovician Bighorn Dolomite. And the dolomite continues on for a number of miles up the canyon. We're going to be seeing a lot of it as I continue to drive. It's pretty spectacular. It's got a lot of really beautiful fractures in it. It's age equivalent to a variety of reservoirs east and northeast of here. So even though it's a dolomitic, pretty dense rock, it's still an important hydrocarbon reservoir in different parts of the Western Interior Basin because of those fractures. Well, the good news is the boundary is well exposed here. The bad news is it's about 40 or 50 feet vertically above the highway, and I didn't bring my climbing gear, so I'm not going to do that. Plus, there's the ever-present traffic. Every time I start shooting a video, these guys show up. It's like somebody sets the alarm off. Hey, there's a geologist filming. Quick, drive. But you can see that really laminated, horizontal planar laminated Gallatin Formation gives credence to the idea that it's a very low energy, possibly tidal flat environment or Sobka or something like that. Remember, we're on the western shore of a much smaller North America right now. And even in the Ordovician, the bulk of this region was all one giant carbonate shelf. So that Bighorn Dolomite formed on a huge expansive shelf that extended across the bulk of Wyoming into Montana, the Dakotas, and even further west. So one big open, what used to be called Panthalassia, global ocean. It's sort of surprising on a side note that the Bighorn Dolomite, despite being such a prominent feature here in Wind River Canyon, there's no sign for it. So if you're looking for it, you're kind of out of luck. You got to know where it is. The crummy little Gallatin, nothing against the Gallatin, but the crummy little Gallatin gets a sign, the Amsden gets a sign. Big, beautiful, prominent, important Bighorn Dolomite, no sign. No respect. It's the Rodney Dangerfield of Paleozoic rocks, I think. It's amazing. There was a break in the traffic, so I was actually able to run across and take a look at one of these thicker packages of the Bighorn Dolomite. And the texture, you notice, looks a lot like the Key Largo limestone, if you've ever been there in the Keys. Heavily burrowed by shrimp and worms, thalassinoides type burrows, open networks. And it creates this distinctive surface texture that looks a lot like decorative lava rock that people use, pumice stone, and that sort of stuff, because it's just Swiss cheesed. And we've seen similar characteristics of Swiss cheesing by invertebrates in some Cretaceous clastics in a different video that I've covered. But this looks like just 100% thalassinoides burrowed shallow marine carbonates, which again is an environment very similar to the modern Florida Keys, except we're back here in the Ordovician. Incidentally, man, rest in peace Jimmy Buffett, standing here in front of the Ordovician version of Key Largo. It makes me want to shed a tear for him. We miss you, buddy. We really do. Okay, I'm going to start driving and hope that today is not the day that thing decides to let go. Fingers crossed. Whew! Success! This is a classic case of, wow, blink and you miss it. The Bighorn Dolomite forms that lowermost bench here along the road. And by the way, we're looking south now. Then it's alleged on some guidebooks and maps that unit right there, that kind of slightly more grayish green, is the Darby. And the Darby allegedly pinches out conveniently right there where the grass disappears into the cliff. On top of that is the mighty Madison limestone. And the Madison forms a huge, thick, hundreds of foot succession that continues on towards the mouth of the canyon. So the Madison, from a distance, looks a whole lot like the Bighorn Dolomite, and you'd be excused if you thought they were the same thing from afar. But wow, yeah, unless somebody pointed this out to me, and fortunately I've got some guidebooks and maps with me, I would have never guessed that this unit here is the Darby separating the Ordovician Bighorn Dolomite from the Madison Limestone. I'd buy that there's a difference between the Dolomite and the Limestone, but that Darby, I don't know, I'm kind of suspicious. I'm going to take a look at it up close. There's no traffic. Let's go see what we see. All right, so I think this is the contact between the Bighorn Dolomite below and the Darby formation above. And the Darby, if that's what this is, and again, no reason to suspect it's not, I'm just a cynical guy. It is gray, it's fissile, it's flaky. You can see there's a really discrete boundary between the dolomite, the massive hard dolomite below, and it's kind of flakier. Probably it was a lime-rich mudstone. So you think of a channel, it's not necessarily a fluvial channel or a sandy channel. This appears to have been a limey mud-filled channel, if it's a channel. And it does seem to be laminated all the way across. And then the Madison limestone sits on top of it, but I'm not climbing up there to check it. I might be able to see it a little bit further up the road because, again, everything's dipping to the north and we're continuing north. So we'll see. But yeah, really cryptic little outcrop here of the Darby. It's a reservoir in other parts of Wyoming at a place called Hamilton Dome. It's thick enough and has enough porosity and permeability to be a reservoir. All right, well, I'll just take the guidebooks and the previous author's word for it. They know better than I do. They spent more time out here. This is the last vestige of the pinching out Darby down there. And we're missing the Silurian. We're going from Ordovician to Devonian and younger. Wow, that's kind of interesting. Let's keep going. We're getting close to the mouth of the canyon. It's just right up there, a couple of bends away. And we're working our way continually up section, so I'm all the way up in the Pennsylvanian now, and this is the Amsden Formation behind me. It's a cherty dolomitic limestone section that's generally interpreted as subtitle through supertitle, representing a big carbonate platform that's essentially the same age and equivalent facies to parts of the Casper Formation down around Laramie. I did a video on that where we looked at some of the limestone that are interfingering with coastal dunes and some tidal flats. No coastal dunes here, we're out on that carbonate shelf. But this is the Permian Amsden, which in the Bighorn Basin to the north of us, not too far, is actually a reservoir. It's a hydrocarbon reservoir. It's really nicely fractured, holds a lot of oil and gas in it. High quality stuff. It's not porosity and permeability between the grains like in a sandstone because it's dolomitic carbonate. Instead, it's a fracture-based reservoir. So that's an interesting kind of thing to ponder if you're into that sort of stuff. I'm at the northern mouth of the canyon now. You can see some red beds of the Permian and Triassic behind me. I would be looking at them shortly. But I just wanted to point out that the river behind me is chock full of insects. I'm standing in a shelter that was nicely built by the highway department. But where you have a river full of insects, you have things that eat insects. There's a lot of fish in the river, but there's also cliff swallows. And the cliff swallows make these really nice mud nests, like that one and that one and that one. Where you have mud nests and cliff swallows, you've got a lot of baby birds pooping. As a result, the picnic table is completely full of bird poop. So, you know, best of intentions on the part of the highway department or whoever built this, but, you know, didn't really think it through when it comes to having cliff swallows building their little mud nests and raising families, because what goes in has to come out, and in this case it's coming out on a picnic table. That's been your neo-ichnology moment for this trip. Let's keep looking at rocks. Across me on that side of the highway is the Permian Phosphoria Formation, which is a really good source rock in other parts of Wyoming. A lot of oil generated from probably cyanobacterial mats. It's a shallow marine, carbonate-rich, somewhat muddy deposit. It's across the highway, and I'm tempted to run across, but there is a lot of traffic today, and there's a lot of distracted drivers like myself looking at the geology and whatnot, so I'm not going to run across. But there is a sign telling us it's Phosphoria, in case you don't believe me. That's one reason I'm not going to run across and look at it. Maybe on another trip. And now we are out of the canyon, rapidly approaching what's called the wetting of the waters, where the Wind River becomes the Bighorn. Kind of poetic. Strange, but poetic. We're in the Mesozoic. We've left behind the Paleozoic, the Cambrian, and all that stuff. Here we are on the Mesozoic. This is the Triassic. This is that red sandstone, siltstone, mudstone. You can see some green in there, some of the chlorite, some of the reducing zones. The chug water has been interpreted a number of ways, not surprisingly. It's been interpreted as tidal flats, sabkas, freshwater, brackish water, you name it. You can see cross-bedding in the sands. Some of it is accentuated by, looks like calcite veins. This is large-scale cross-bedding in some of the sands. Some of the facies is actually called the platy facies. That's a silt and chlorite-rich, sandy, heterolithic-looking material. Probably a lot of this represents extremely distal distributive fluvial systems coming out onto a big semi-arid playa. There's a big lake in western Wyoming, a little bit younger than this, called Lake Poposia, named for the Poposia River. And it's full of a mineral called anilsimolite. So it's an aluminosilicate mineral. Looks like little oolites almost. This is not that. This is genuine cross-bedded sand. Some of this actually might be, some of these big cross-beds in the sand might be toes of aeolian sands that have gotten saturated when they hit like a playa or standing water. And then the rest of the sand blows off and leaves behind the toes of the aeolian dunes. So I'm looking at that bed up there, and I'm seeing some big cross beds. It makes me think that could actually be an aeolian dune. And in that case, some of these heterolithics might be interdune deposits. I'm going to wrap it up because it's been a long day. I'm pretty beat at this point. I hope you've enjoyed this trip through the Wind River Canyon. We talked about a lot. We saw a lot, experienced a lot together. You know, as always, I appreciate you watching these videos. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you sometime on the outcrop. And if not, well, keep watching videos because I'm going to make some more. And I'll see you next time.
Yes, science!